Remote Evil. Book 1. Chapter 30. Is it Norman? This audiovisual book was created by Joseph Russell Tim Pugh Gyson. Every instinct of every police and military investigators involved in the case of Cherry believes Norman is the criminal they are looking for. His personality fits the rapist of Cherry. He is an intelligent man who knows a lot about advanced technology and is in no coincidence also an expert in surveillance and drone technology. The investigators also believe that he desires Cherry based on what Cherry told them about their chance encounter at the park, which the investigators believed was staged by Norman. They also believe his mental and emotional state is capable of doing the crime because they describe him as a lonely and desperate old man who seeks the companionship of a desirable woman like Cherry. They also believe he may be selling classified technology to criminals, terrorists, or other countries, and that is the reason why they are being extra thorough in their investigation on him. They are, however, finding it very hard to pin him down. They have been secretly following his every move for quite some time now, and they are not finding anything out of the ordinary. He still does the same routine every day with little change. He works hard during the weekdays and has a good time during the weekends. Though they think that a man who is always all alone is suspicious, they cannot do anything with it because he is not breaking any law by being all alone always. Because Norman is always alone, they cannot associate him with any possible accomplices. They are not yet finished checking the backgrounds of his office mates, but their preliminary findings conclude that all of them are unlikely to be associates of Norman in his crimes if ever he is the criminal they are after. But the single stumbling block in their investigation is the alibis of Norman. The day Cherry and John Jr. escaped, the rapist Norman was nowhere to be found. He was found a few days later by a family on a seldom passed road. He was badly beaten and tortured and has to be taken to a hospital. This is according to the police report submitted to them by those who handled the investigation regarding the beating and torture of Norman. The family that rescued Norman were indeed going to a vacation when Norman stopped them asking for help. The family has a clean reputation and a valid alibi. That is why the police concluded that they are not in any way accomplices of Norman. Norman may have intentionally used them as unwitting witnesses to his alibi. The doctor's report on the medical condition of Norman because of his beatings and torture also provides a big difficulty in prosecuting Norman. The investigators hoped that the stab wounds, cuts, and bite marks which Cherry inflicted to her rapist would leave a mark and would be the key to identifying the rapist. Norman has bruises, was also stabbed, has cuts and other wounds all over his body, including the areas which Cherry described to the investigators. To the investigators, Norman may have intentionally asked someone to beat him, stab him, cut him, and wound him to hide the injuries which Cherry inflicted on him. It may seem drastic, but in doing so Norman was able to evade being identified as the rapist of Cherry based on the injuries she inflicted on her rapist. Norman claimed that he was ambushed while about to board his van by men with masked faces. They took him to a deserted area and beat and tortured him before leaving him and taking his van. Of course, Norman reported that he has no clear idea of the criminals or even the whereabouts of his missing van. The neighbors of Norman whom the investigators asked reported that they do not even know who is the person living in the house of Norman. Very few people have seen him. But they reported that they see the lights of Norman were turned on regularly and they hear the sound of either the television or the music player of Norman regularly. They even hear the sound of his van when it arrives and leaves the house. The investigators believe that Norman may have timers or remote controls to automatically turn the television and the music player on or off to fool his neighbors into thinking he is at home when in fact he is somewhere else. The investigators concluded that Norman has his neighbors as unwitting witnesses to his alibis too. They also think that, as Cherry suspected, the rapist works on weekdays. Norman also works on weekdays and has his office mates as witnesses for his alibi. Failing to have a solid case using the circumstances after Cherry and John Jr. escaped and while she was being held captive, they turned their attention to the first few days of the kidnapping of Cherry. By coincidence, Norman applied for a one-week vacation the same several days when Cherry was first kidnapped. But the investigators learned from his office mates that before he left for his vacation he told them where he was going on a vacation and even showed the tickets to the concerts he was going to, as if he was trying to tell them where to find the evidences needed in case they wanted to prove that he really went on a vacation. Of course, the investigators already knew that Norman could have given his tickets and reservations and other vacation documents for someone else to use. They also noted that the vacation events that Norman went to were high-volume events or events where there are so many people who attended that it would be very difficult for the vacation events staff to clearly remember anybody who attended. To the investigators, Norman could have paid anyone to take his place in going to these mass-volume events. Any random cash-strapped teenager would have taken Norman's place to these events in an instant, considering they were events popular with teenagers. He could have even handed them anonymously to anyone in the streets. When Norman returned from his alleged vacation, he showed souvenirs to his office mates as proof of his attendance to these events. The investigators believe that he may have bought them somewhere else or online. He may have asked someone else to buy it to cover his tracks, especially if it was purchased online. Norman has no pictures that he can use as evidence to prove that he was at these events, but it was not out of the ordinary, as a lot of people do not record their activities even if they attend important special events. But this just strengthened the beliefs of the investigators that he has faked his vacation. Both the police and military investigators combined to use these explanations to obtain a search warrant on the house of Norman. They searched every part of the house of Norman while he talked on the telephone to his attorney. They found nothing to link Norman with the rapist. They checked his computers but found nothing as well to prosecute Norman with. It was odd that his hard drives were relatively new as well as their data contents. It was odd and suspicious but not illegal. There were drones, but they were the normal commercial models sold everywhere. The drones of Norman were no different from any drones in the market. There were no clues to link them with the drones that attacked Cherry and John Jr. The pornographic magazines of Norman were no longer there. Besides his rap music CDs, there are now other music CDs. To investigators, Norman might have already cleaned out his house of anything that will prove he is the rapist, and may also be trying to project a positive image to the police. They already checked his telephone records and found nothing to prosecute him with. He hardly made any calls, and these few calls were to office mates and to pizza delivery services. He was clean as far as his telephone records are concerned. The investigators have to use special clearances to investigate his online activities. They found nothing as well that would enable them to prosecute him. They believe he used the special settings of his internet browser to remain anonymous. They believe he used fake online identities. They believe he used different computers from either his house or from other locations like internet cafes. They believed he used stolen credit card information to buy online. They believe he used stolen computer and electronics equipment. They believe Norman has done all of these things and much more to cover his tracks from everybody, especially the police. They believe Norman has been doing it for a long time already, even before the kidnapping of Cherry and maybe even before the murder of Dan. They believe his tools for crime are somewhere else. Maybe they are in his missing van. Then a separate investigating team discovered the body of John Sr. It was found by a search dog specially trained by the police for such missions. He was buried in a shallow grave not far from the camper van. By the time they discovered his body, it was already beyond recognition. It has been more than 2 months since he died. His body was also burned by the rapist, which made analyzing him medically almost impossible. He was identified through his dental records. There were no clues left on him to help identify his killer. Norman was interrogated by the investigators over and over again, hoping to break him or to force him to make a mistake in his statement, which the investigators can use to prosecute him. They found out Norman can match their tactics. His statements were precise. As if he was in a movie where he is the central character and he knows every part of the movie. His story is so well scripted that it covers everything from the day Dan was killed until the day Cherry and John Jr. escaped the rapist. He may have been already coached by his lawyer, or maybe planned his crime to near perfection for a very long time before finally executing it. This is what the investigators concluded. His lawyer was known for defending criminals and winning their cases. Lastly, they checked the financial records of Norman, hoping these will reveal his accomplices. His alibis, although suspicious, were legal. Norman has a huge box of receipts for all kinds of purchases made by him. There were receipts for food, clothing, cigarette, magazine, alcohol, and other non-expensive items that does not record the name of the purchaser and is usually thrown after the purchase of the item. The investigators believe Norman collected these receipts for years already for his use as an alibi in case the need arises. Someone could have given him the receipts, or he may have picked them up from the floors or garbage bins of the stores he frequented. Norman also has receipts for very expensive items. But investigators already knew this old trick. Norman could have acquired this dubious receipts from ghost stores. These ghost stores issue overpriced receipts for products brought from them in connivance with their buyer, who uses it to hide their usually illegal transactions. These ghost stores are virtually invisible to the police. The lawyer of Norman also made sure that the investigators cannot intimidate Norman anymore. Norman was also getting better and better every time he retells his alibi. The more questions the investigators throw at him, the more he integrates the new facts to his alibis. As if he has already anticipated every question that would come up. Norman seems to know what the entire jigsaw puzzle looks like and is now just putting the pieces together. The jigsaw puzzle is his alibi. The investigators are also beginning to see what the entire jigsaw puzzle looks like. The entire jigsaw puzzle looks like this to the investigators: he is the criminal, but he will never be caught. End of chapter.